someday.
We have the quarterback of the Kansas State Wildcats, Big 12 champion Will Howard.
So excited to announce Kansas City Sports Network's new soccer channel.
They're taking advantage of a look that they utilized earlier in the game to show the jet sweep motion.
It's a live edition of the KC Laboratory presented by Emprise.
You kind of root for guys to have those moments, and that was certainly a big moment.
Welcome into Mizzou, that's really your podcast from Missouri Athletics here on KC Sports Network.
Welcome, everybody, to the Border War Podcast.
Welcome back. Another episode of Ain't No Season Podcast.
You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
It's a live edition of the KC Laboratory presented by Emprise Bank, member FDIC. I have reported to the show this week after being absent, holding out on Thursday. I'm back to see you and Maddie Lane. Craig Stout, what's good?
Everything's good. This is weird. Why'd you go out of order? I don't like this. I liked it better when you weren't here.
Did he even go out of order, or did he just leave it open-ended to see which one of us is going to take the bait?
I don't know. I think I don't know.
Hey, look, I extended an offer to both of you, and we'll see if either of you accept it.
I don't. I need at least $30 million to show up to this podcast this year.
So rejected.
Thank you to everybody that's hanging out with us, and happy training camp to all of you. I am so excited to be here to be talking about real football things and football happenings and storylines that are already beginning to surface in St. Joseph, Missouri. It's going to be a lot of fun today hanging out with Maddie Lane and Craig Stout. You heard them both. Hello, Maddie. How are we?
You know, I am doing great. Training camp is here. We have gotten past the dry months of football, and it is time. We are here for a nice, fun, if you're at St. Joe, probably a little wet with sweat football talk.
Craig?
Go on, Kit.
Hi.
I listen, man. I already said my intro. $30 million. That's what it's going to take for me to contribute in this week's podcast. That's it.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're gonna have to discuss all that. There's so much happening, and there's so much that's gone on with this whole Chris Jones saga the last few days. Chris Jones has not reported a training camp. Everybody knows that by now. You know, starting to see, little bits and pieces of the overarching kind of narrative and framework of the conversation for the Chris Jones stuff. So, reportedly far apart are Chris Jones and the Kansas City Chiefs. Reportedly, Chris Jones is seeking $30 million. Also reportedly, per Andy Reid from the podium, a little bit surprised that Chris Jones has chosen to not arrive at training camp with the rest of his teammates. It's only been a few days, but I'll start with you, Maddie. How concerned about this whole Chris Jones situation are we at this point? Seems a little bit chaotic the last few days. Feels a little, just like the storylines and the positioning doesn't seem great. It doesn't give me the warm fuzzies exactly.
So what am I being concerned over? Am I being concerned over him not playing football this year? 0%, because he loses a lot of money if he starts holding out through games. So I have no concerns that he's going to come out and play football this year and play to the absolute best of his ability because, well, that makes it a contract year for him. And he wants to put out the best tape he can going into a contract year. So 0 concerns that he does not play football this year. Obviously, it's most likely for the Chiefs. So no concerns in that regard. A long-term contract situation, I wouldn't say I'm concerned, but I think there's enough stuff now to maybe have doubts as a fan if a long-term deal gets done this offseason before the season starts, or maybe at all. I'm going to build the case later on. We're going to get through this part first of why the Chiefs may not extend Chris Jones for longer. And so I do think there is a chance that the odds of that happening are getting increasingly higher, but I don't think there's any football related concerns this year, no matter what happens.
Yeah. Chris Jones is playing week 1, period. Anybody who's sitting here being like, oh man, what are we going to do without Chris Jones this year? He's playing week 1 and he's playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't see an avenue where they either trade him, because at this point, like the assets that you would get back for a Chris Jones this late in the offseason, and then somebody to absorb the cap hit that comes with it is massive. Teams just don't have that amount of money lying around. Not very many of them do, certainly. And two, he is the most important piece to this defense right now. Absolutely the most important piece. The Chiefs want him here. He will be here week 1. I'm with Matty. I'm not saying that a long-term contract is absolutely going to happen or anything like that, but he will play in the 2023-2024 season every single game. This is not going to be a holdout. He is making $19.5 million in a base salary this year. That is doled out game by game. Chris Jones wants every penny of that $19.5 million. This isn't like a signing bonus where you got like $1 million base salary like he did in year 2, where you're just like, okay, well, my game checks are going to be a little bit light, but I got the big signing bonus up front. No, these are game checks. These matter to him in a big, big way. And as it stands right now, the only thing that he's losing out on by not being at camp, short of the fines, is a $500,000 workout bonus. That's it. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that this is a big deal. I think he's going to be there week 1. As a matter of fact, I think he's going to be here in the middle of training camp. We can get into the rest of this here, but as far as this year goes, he's absolutely unequivocally playing for the Kansas City Chiefs.
All right, so I will be livid if Chris Jones is not playing week 1 for the Kansas City Chiefs. As far as like, and I think the chances of that happening are 99.999%. Like, he is 100% going to be playing in week 1. It would not make any sense whatsoever. Like, there's no trading Chris Jones in 2023. I think that's crazy. If you are far apart on a contract, you can have the conversation about perhaps moving on from Chris Jones after this season. And we can get there in a second. But it's just kind of funny to me that, you know, we are coming off the year where Chris Jones puts it together in a big, big way. He's always been an exceptional, elite, disruptive interior pass rusher. I think you saw him make marked improvement in every facet of his game last season. Obviously, you know, with a career high in sacks, but also how he played the run, the consistency with playing the run, you know, the gap integrity that he played with relative to what we've seen him in years past. He put together an absolutely phenomenal year. And to the point where, you know, I think it's just, it's so clear cut that there's a desire for all of us to see this man get paid and be assigned to an extension in Kansas City for a long time. But I am getting a little nervous. And it's funny because I don't know, like, you know, I don't know if there was enough concerns the last time around with this whole conversation about, you know, Chris Jones and his extension, and he got paid, and I'm glad the Chiefs paid him. But man, there's enough things here that you could see the other side of, you know, how as much time as we've spent this offseason going, he's going to get paid. He deserves to get paid. The Chiefs should pay him. There is a other side to this. There's an other side to this whole, you know, conversation that you can frame up to justify maybe not. And before I say all this, I think we're all on the same page. We want Chris Jones to get paid, right? Like we've maintained that this entire offseason. I think it's probably Craig definitely. Maddie, maybe the line of $30 million, no. But
I mean, like, I think he should get paid. I hope he gets paid. I hope he gets $30 million. I don't know if I think the Chiefs should be the ones who throw $30 million per year at him.
Let's talk about it then.
They should pay him, just not that much money. And if that's what's going to take, then maybe we have a fun conversation next year.
Let's do it. Let's just talk about it, Matty.
Oh, I mean, like, here it is. Here's the case for why you don't pay an interior defensive lineman who's 29 years old to $30 million a year. Defensive tackles aren't good after the age of 30. They just simply are not very good. That's about 30, 31 is when all your best defensive tackles of all time have their fall off. This past year was Aaron Donald, the best defensive player I've ever seen play, the best defensive tackle, bar none, hands down. 31, Granted, he was injured, but this was the first year where he, quote unquote, falls off. Chris Jones plays better than him. I think that's objectively true, but Aaron Donald's age and injury, which you can't completely rule out his age playing a part in that, is part of that reason. You go look at other guys that have been dominating the league at defensive tackle the recent years. Fletcher Cox starts falling off around age 30, and Ndamukong Suh becomes a mercenary for playing for teams for 1 to 2 years, right around the age at 30. Even going back to Warren Sapp, fell off around age 30. Granted, he had like a random 10-sack year with the Oakland Raiders at like 35 years old for no reason, but everything else from 30 to then was just okay. So if you're going to pay Chris Jones that much money at this point in his career, you're going to have a couple years in there where you're paying a guy that historically his position group at that age isn't going to perform at the same level he just did this past year. I think that's where it starts. And then you go look at the team like the Chiefs, who have always been hesitant to play players that are in the middle of or coming up on the end of their prime. Chris Jones is at the end of a defensive tackle's prime. 29 is by definitely the end of a defensive tackle's prime for the NFL, for their production and where their peak output is. So the Chiefs would be kind of going back on what Brett Veach's kind of mantra or what he's done in the past of not paying guys at any position, but especially a position that has a lower age drop-off, that much money. I am not saying they're not going to do it. I am not saying that I don't think it should be entertained or they shouldn't sign Chris Jones, but you want to have the conversation for why the Chiefs would be hesitating to do it. Defensive tackles aren't good when they get to this age. They're just not consistently good. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry unless you're talking about Reggie White from the 90s, who was dominant forever, apparently.
I will say this. I don't disagree with it. Historical data will point you towards not paying players over the age of 28 in general. Like, there are very few positions that you can do that. And Brett Veach has, by and large, in his tenure as the Kansas City Chiefs GM, drawn a hard line over paying, guys that are over that age. The guys that he has are the Mitchell Schwartzes, the Travis Kelce's, committing to Patrick Mahomes for that long. Again, quarterback is different, certainly. I think Chris Jones can easily fall in that category. I really, truly do, because he's 29 this year. They don't have a ton of extra money invested in the defensive line right now. I mean, they are used to carrying 2 massive defensive line contracts. They can certainly restructure Chris's contract, make something that makes sense here. I can see this as a deal with a lot of fluff where they can get out of it in 2, 3, 4 years. Basically, when he's talking about 31, 32. The reason that I am so willing to pay Chris Jones this time, even more so than the last time, I was maybe one of those guys that was like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. His commitment and buy-in to the system is so much different than it was back then. I think everybody will remember the last holdout. This man was talking about, hey, Le'Veon Bell told me that I need to hold out. Maybe I just don't play at all this year. He was tweeting stuff like that. That was out there. He was threatening to hold out through the season. This is a different guy. He knows that he's due a new deal. He knows that the Chiefs don't want him to play on a $28 million cap hit this year. They can certainly clear some space there. And then on top of that, he did everything he was asked to last year. He was not sack hunting. He was not blowing assignments. He was not doing some of the things that we saw earlier in his career. He was very disciplined, very committed to it, showed the makings of a true leader. And those are the guys that the Chiefs love to go out and reward. So yes.
To quickly interject though, I will say, you mentioned earlier, the positions the Chiefs have paid older players, Mitchell Schwartz, Travis Kelce, positions where the elite players have had success beyond 30.
They have.
You look at your best tight ends, Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, Shannon Sharp, Jason Witten, everyone besides Gronkowski, whose body just fell apart. They played well, very well into their mid-30s. And then at offensive tackle, we have guys like Whitworth. Trent Williams is still the best offensive tackle in the league, right? So I will say those positions have held up a lot better than defensive tackles have for their longevity. Sorry, Kent.
No, that's Falcons legend, Tony Gonzalez. We're going to take a break. I have a lot of thoughts about this Chris Jones situation right after this.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
Tucker Franklin has a new KCSN update at 9 o'clock. Make sure you check that out. It'll be immediately following this. It is going to be awesome. That dude is absolutely crushing it right now. He's covering everything at St. Joseph. It is going to be very good. So make sure you're checking that out. Please feel free to hit that like button, subscribe button, leave a 5-star review. Those help us if it's on Spotify or on iTunes, whatever. It helps us grow KC Sports Network. Oh man, Chris Jones. So the things that terrify me about not signing Chris Jones, because I'm going on both sides. The Chiefs don't have a blue chip defender like Chris Jones. They don't have a blue chip player. Like, no, there's not many teams that do. And so, yes, I'm like, the idea of just going away from a guy like this is scary. It's a scary proposition. And that's like, I think what everything is rooted in. And it's also the idea of, Patrick Mahomes talks about his contract, and he talks about, making sure to keep good players around him. Is not that, Chris Jones needs to have all the leverage in the world, but the Chiefs have moved on from some guys with Patrick Mahomes' contract. And Patrick Mahomes brings up guys like Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, and L'Jarius Sneed, interestingly enough, earlier this year as reasons, that wanting to keep all these good players around him. Patrick Mahomes had, it's almost like, I'm not saying Patrick Mahomes has to sign off on that deal, but what kind of message does that send to Patrick Mahomes if they're not able, if they're missing on a guy like Chris Jones and not keeping him within the building either? And I know that's a little bit of a maybe not necessarily the same kind of discussion we're having, but these are the things I'm thinking about when I'm listening to, or when I'm paying attention to this Chris Jones situation. I have some thoughts on life after Chris Jones, if it does get to that too, but I don't know. I don't know if it's I don't know if Chris Jones has as much leverage as he thinks, because this team has definitely operated on a very stringent group of terms with a lot of people. I just feel like they should have something done by now if it's close. And that's the thing that's giving me a little pause right now.
Well, let's go to the impact. I think you mentioned the impact kind of on maybe somebody like Mahomes or the rest of the team and the message that sends. Boy, Mahomes, Kelce, these guys have kind of taken some pretty team-friendly-ish deals to be on the team roster, right? So if that is being offered and it's being rejected, one, I have no qualms with Chris Jones or any player ever rejecting a deal that does not maximize the absolute most money they can get. That's fine. That's very much what they deserve given what they go through. But I don't know if you can be too worried about that message to these other guys if that has been offered to somebody else and they have decided not to take it. Then I don't know if Craig had something else to jump in before we talked about potential future without Chris Jones.
I mean, there's just, yeah, we can get into potential future without Chris Jones. We can jump in unless Kent's got something here. Yeah.
No, I want to move on to the future with if they are to move on. First off, again reiterating, should not trade, will not trade him before the season. I think that would be a ridiculous idea. I think you can't build a plan for a championship roster and on the fly move on from somebody like Chris Jones in July. So I think that's a ridiculous idea.
If it would have happened in March, this is a completely different scenario.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about life after Chris Jones, for our purpose here, we're talking about next year, not this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very important point here, because I think that some people start to think, oh, they're not going to extend Chris Jones. He's not going to play for him this year. They're going to move him right now. I see very, very unlikely that would ever happen. So this is a move that would happen next offseason, whether it's just losing him to free agency or some kind of tag and trade potential thing going on next offseason, right? So
okay. Well, can I jump in here real quick with this thought?
You can set it up however you want, buddy.
I just have a big thought that I want to get off my chest that I almost got off there earlier. I look at if you don't pay Chris Jones this year, you're getting contract year Chris Jones on the right side of 30. You are probably getting if he stays healthy, which again, you're hoping he stays healthy regardless of what happens. If he stays healthy and you get contract year Chris Jones, you are getting a great season out of a elite player at his position, and then you're moving on from him on the wrong side of 30 via a tag and trade situation. You're not paying $30 million to one single player, and you can spread that cap space across other deals along the defense and look to identify a more cost-controlled difference maker on your front via free agency. You can continuing to invest in the defensive line via the draft. There are ways that you can, you can spread that money around. There's a lot of, if you don't do it, if you don't pay Chris Jones, there are ways and avenues to continuing to build a good roster around Patrick Mahomes and building this team with the assets that you're likely to get for him after he goes out and has another career year so he gets paid. So keeping that carrot in front of Chris Jones doesn't seem like a terrible, consolation prize if they aren't able to get a deal done with him this year.
Okay, so a big part of the Chris Jones, a big part to try here with Chris Jones going forward is this. A lot of the argument is, well, when the Chiefs traded, it always gets equated to the Tyreek Hill situation. When the Chiefs traded Tyreek Hill, there was obvious the answer was you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Travis Kelce. They will make up for the hold left by Tyreek Hill because they are so good. And then we have Andy Reid. The defense does not have that. That is 100% true. The defense does not have a Patrick Mahomes or a Travis Kelce to go through and make up for any hole left by Chris Jones. However, you can very clearly see how the Chiefs could be thinking they are preparing for this by investing back-to-back round one picks and a defensive lineman. By signing your biggest free agency addition was another defensive lineman, a guy that has some outside-inside versatility. I'm not saying George Karlaftis or Felix or Charles Omenihu or Chris Jones or would make up for what he's missing, but the Chiefs are clearly investing in guys on the defense all across the board, specifically in the defensive line position. If they went into next offseason knowing they were going to lose Chris Jones, one, they would have about $30 million extra dollars to spend on the free agency class, whether that is chasing after somebody like a Trey Hendrickson or a Danielle Hunter or a Leonard Williams or just whoever. Like they would have, I guess none of those guys are young. I get it. I haven't looked at the entire free agency class, but they're all good players that won't cost as much as Chris Jones. They would have $30 million to spread around and add multiple players to fill his spot for the same amount of money. They've continued to add depth to the secondary, to the linebacker room. They have built out a really good defense of quality players around Chris Jones where he's clearly still the star. The question becomes, if they don't know if he's going to be that star for the next 3 years, instead of paying him like he's going to be for sure, why don't you use that money and potentially more draft capital to continue to add more bodies? I don't think they're in a great spot to do it, but we have to remember they have another offseason. They'd have a lot of money, more draft capital to do so next year. I don't think the team would look as bad as I think a lot of people seem to assume if they had those opportunities. If they had $30 million and a couple extra draft picks to replace Chris Jones, I think they could definitely field a functional, younger defense overall. It's just a matter of, could they, I guess, pull it all off, and would they be better? That I don't know.
We keep saying this every offseason about, next year they'll have more money. Next year they're going to go out and they're going to make those splashes. Next year they're going to use this money that they freed up for X, Y, and Z so that they can really target those big free agents, and they don't. Like they just don't do that because they don't have to. They're a good enough football team that they don't have to chase big money deals that often in free agency. Jump in here real quick.
And counterpoint though, when they need to, they do.
Sure. I was getting ready to get into that. Yes.
Okay.
When there are big holes and they feel like they absolutely need to make a move, they will go ahead and they will spend on it. I.e. Joe Toney, i.e. Jawan Taylor. I mean, like
Trent Williams,
Tyrann Mathieu, Frank Clark. They will strategically target it, but year after year we keep looking ahead at this free agent market. We keep looking at this. You can look at the market and say, oh yeah, Christian Wilkins is a free agent next year. That would be a great guy to add to this roster. His certainly cost way less than Chris Jones, and he'd be younger. He checks a lot of boxes for Brett Veach there. But the reality of this is they're not going to go out and sign a guy, that's going to make $20 to $25 million as a defensive tackle. They just don't do that. Again, we look back at Tyreek Hill. They had an opportunity to sign a lot of guys for a lot of money. You know what they did? None of that. So I look at this year over year and I say, hey, listen, we keep accumulating this money. They're taking care of their own guys in-house. I foresee a Creed, a Bolton, a Sneed. You know, you can allocate that money towards them. But I don't look at this as, hey, tag and trade Chris Jones, and you have all these assets, you have all this money that you can really spend to make your team better. In reality, it's draft picks. That's what you're getting out of that, and you are hoping that a draft pick can come in and replicate not exactly what Chris Jones is, because you're not getting a first-team All-Pro. You're just not. That's not what you get out of that. But you're hoping that they can fill enough of the void and build enough of the pieces around Mahomes, around the defensive pieces that are left, to try and make up for some of that. That's not something that happens right away. So in reality, the Chris Jones thing, yes, totally agree with that. Paying him that amount of money, it does potentially make you worse in the future if the decline happens. But in the same token, I don't think we can sit here and just say, oh, they're going to go out and spend $15 million a year on these two guys in free agency next year to make them better, when they haven't historically done that.
And I think another piece of all this, it's like, we're talking about what they could do with that money, if they don't sign Chris Jones. And I'm going to speak out both sides of my mouth. I think Creed Humphrey's a blue chip center.
Mm-hmm.
I think Nick Bolton is a very good linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm as like, if the logic is we're going to move on from Chris Jones so we can retain those two players. I don't know if I'm like doing backflips over that process necessarily, if that makes sense. Now, I won't, especially like Creed Humphrey's a blue chip, and I think the Chiefs will do everything they can to maintain blue chips. And that's smart, because this is the whole point with the Chris Jones stuff too. Where the Chiefs draft, and Brevi just said this a little bit, it is very hard to acquire blue chip players. Just period. It is hard to get a blue chip player.
Especially
is hard
when you win.
Yes, because that's exactly, because they're going to be picking in the 30s. They have a blue chip player in like a Creed Humphrey that they should keep. And we can have the conversation about what Nick Bolton will require and what the line should be for both of those guys. We should have that conversation down the road. But I don't know. I just don't want to sacrifice, Chris Jones with the logic being, well, we had to pay X player X, Y, and Z necessarily, because Chris Jones is a blue chip player that they're not going to find at pick 32 in the draft next year. I said 32. You heard me. That's where.
And I know people are going to come in and say, Chris Jones was a second round pick. It took a little while to get to this point, guys. It took
and Chris Jones was not a second round talent, and it wasn't. I don't think he was necessarily the cleanest prospect coming out by some. So there are reasons that sometimes a Justin Houston falls in the third or a Chris Jones falls in. There are ways to get those players, but sometimes there are calculated risks that are involved with guys like that. So,
so it's like the common theme that we all are afraid of, and I think most fans are, is how bad this defense would look without Chris Jones. I get
Terrified.
it, but I mean, look what the Chiefs have done the last few years, though. They've been steadily improving the defense. I mean, not just starters, but the depth behind it. The talent on the defensive side of the ball this season is significantly higher than it's been the last couple of years. And I think you could argue that they lost other guys that were supposed to be or close to blue chip players when they tried to bring him in, like a Tyrann Mathieu or a Frank Clark, guys that maybe didn't live up to what you wanted, but also like were still very good. Like they lost more overall top end talent than they have right now, but guys, they've just added so many players that they've developed and been better. Why can't they keep doing that without Chris Jones? What is the one defense that's given the Chiefs the most trouble in the playoffs? The Cincinnati Bengals? Who's their Chris Jones? Who's their Chris Jones?
Reader.
Big Lou.
He's not even close to Chris Jones.
No, he's not. But DJ Reader is criminally underrated.
It's Big Lou.
So the Chiefs could easily let Chris Jones go, sign a DJ Reader level player, and save a lot of money. It's just all my point is. So like, why? And if you look at the rest of the Bengals defense, I don't think that their talent is significantly higher than the Chiefs outside the other 10 positions. Sure, Trey Hendrickson's probably better than any defensive end they have, but that's the last defensive lineman on their roster. It's better. That's clearly better than any of the Chiefs. I don't think their corners are better. Their safeties certainly aren't better. Now, like, where are they better? And then the Chiefs have Chris Jones, but yet the Bengals defense presents every team they face in the playoffs a lot of problems because their defensive coordinator does great things. They play good team defense. Why can't the Chiefs do that if they were to move on from Chris Jones? Why can't they do that? And like, I get the theory is they're going to be terrible without him. I don't know if I'm ready to chalk up the Chiefs defense to being terrible without Chris Jones, especially with another year.
I think the truth of it is they're going to have to do this at some point in Patrick Mahomes' career too. You know, I don't think there's just always going to be a ton of blue chip interior defensive linemen just readily available for them to grab. So like at some point, they're probably going to be playing without a blue chip interior defensive lineman.
You're not going to find another Chris Jones, period. No. He is one of one. Like, he was the best interior defensive lineman in the league last year, bar none. I know people want to say Quinnen Williams, but it was Chris, period. Quinnen's coming, but that was a top 5 pick. Like, that's a dude that's way up there, a guy that the Chiefs are never going to be able to sniff. So, yes, it is going to happen. They are going to have to find other ways around it. It's just they haven't found that yet.
Speed round. Over under August 1, Chris Jones shows up to St. Joseph. Over under, Matthew.
Let's go under. Pads come on. I think he comes right around when pads come on.
Okay. Great.
I'm going to say under as well. He's under contract. There's a big deal. I mean, he's going to show up.
He's still probably going to miss a few padded practices because you have that ramp up period, but I am with you. I think that's about right. I think it still comes in the next week, hopefully. And we'll see if they get a deal done. We're going to take a break. We'll be back after this.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
Maddie, I'll let you jump in here. You had one more Chris Jones related thing before we moved on from Kadarius Toney. You're just absolutely ruining everything. It's okay. Here we go. What do you got, bub?
Well, I wanted to shout out Bumpa here real quick for hitting the super chat up. It's always going, guys. I said, don't pay Tyreek to pay Chris. Don't pay Chris to pay Creed and Bolton. Don't pay them to can't keep doing this. Yeah. Listen,
fully agree.
There's a train there. However, Creed and Bolton aren't 28, 29 years old when this contract's coming up. Guess who got paid their first time around? Their contract's coming up. Tyreek and Chris. They both did get paid once by the Chiefs. So I think that part is got to be thrown there. I did have a quick question. We don't got to spend a lot of time on this. If the Chiefs traded Chris Jones right now to a team, who is the worst wide receiver you would take back in a 1-for-1 trade for Chris Jones? Who is the worst one? I know Craig's answer.
I know.
We're just going to go down receiving leaders. Would you trade Chris Jones straight up right now? Take everything into consideration, money, age, everything you want for Justin Jefferson?
Yes.
Tyreek Hill?
No.
I mean, this team already said no. So
sure. Stephon Diggs, 29 years old. I'll throw that out there.
No, I also don't want Chris in Buffalo.
CeeDee Lamb.
Nope.
That's 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns at 23 years old. Yikes. I would in a heartbeat. Amon-Ra St. Brown.
No.
Same stats essentially as CeeDee Lamb. Okay, so that's I don't need to go any farther. You guys would trade Chris Jones for no wide receivers. Okay.
Justin Jefferson, just it. That's it.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And Minnesota would never do that trade.
Right. And they would never do it. Yikes.
Jamar Chase.
I mean, I would.
Sure.
AJ Brown. Yeah, I would. I would do it for a lot more guys than you guys would because I am worried about the cliff of a defensive tackle falling off in 1 year. So the Chiefs are either going to get a lot less than what any of those wide receivers I just named for next year in free agency to get rid of Chris Jones, or they're going to pay him a whole lot of money. And I just don't know how much confidence I have that he will continue to be last year's version of Chris Jones for that much money. That's
fair. That's fair. And to kind of tag this up, and it will go right.
Too bad for me. I just want to say T. Higgins is not good enough for me to make
thank you, Sophia.
Gotcha. But I want to tag this up, and it will kind of transition into what we're getting ready to talk about here. Chris Jones is so important to this team because this team is relying on its defense to kind of pick up a little bit of slack this year because of what's happening on the offensive side of the ball, because of the wide receiver position. So you have to have a truly game-breaking player in order for me to be like, yeah, that's fine with me, because I'm a little bit opposite of Maddie. I think this defense goes pretty far down if Chris Jones isn't there. I don't think the pressure's there. I think Spags has to blitz more. I think that exposes some of the corners a little bit more. I think that this defense is worse than we even think without Chris Jones there. So it has to be a receiver that can help win more shootouts, which, that's like a Justin Jefferson level player for me.
And one other quick thing, if they don't move, if they do move on from Chris Jones after this year via trade, I don't necessarily hate the idea of continuing to spread assets across the entirety of the roster, including draft picks, because I do think there is something to be said about continually building depth and talent across the sport and finding value. You're going to find more opportunities. You're going to find more Jalen Watsons and Isaiah Pacheco's, and that's not a bad thing either. But I think the Chiefs can still do a lot of that stuff while paying Chris Jones. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Let's talk about Kadarius Toney, Chiefs wide receiver, who, according to Adam Schefter, underwent an offseason cleanup procedure on his knee that nobody knew about in Kansas City as far as fans are concerned. Obviously the Chiefs did. Aggravated the injury Sunday while fielding a punt and is expected to miss some time during training camp, but be ready for the start of the regular season per league sources. Okay, really quick. You guys have been to training camp a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Punt returns.
Mm-hmm.
Those normally happen before warm-ups, right? They're just out there. So most of the time, the punt returners are out there a little bit early, getting some work, catching some punts, right? That's before stretches. That's before team takeoff.
Mm-hmm.
So Kadarius Toney might not have even made it to the first practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's what
tweaked his knee.
The media members were saying, I don't think I see Kadarius Toney out here today. Some of the media members that maybe missed the opening punts that, basically said, I don't think Kadarius is here today. I wonder what happened to him that he didn't report. And, they may have just shown up a little bit late, missed that opening punt thing, and now all of a sudden you're missing completely the fact that he went to the medical tent.
So we get this report that, he's missing the opening of the very first practice. There was some kind of procedure that he did, which kind of might explain some of his involvement in some of the OTA stuff now and the minicamp stuff now. It makes a lot of that more clear because they were obviously maybe managing that a little bit. But man, in an off season where DeAndre Hopkins has been the title of this show, 5 different times in the offseason, and the debates and discussions about the wide receiver room and the things that bring us fear about what could go wrong potentially with this wide receiver room. One of the biggest fears was realized before the first practice even happened. Kadarius Toney, and by all accounts, they're hoping he's ready for the start of the regular season. Boy, howdy. It's sad, it's a bummer, and it's the worst fears realized before the first practice of training camp, Matthew.
First of all, hope Kadarius Toney is all right. Hope it's nothing serious. Hope he can get healthy and get back to camp. He had tweeted out something like the report was slightly wrong or something, and that he'll be back soon. I don't know if that was the good news or bad news. He'll be back sooner or later than what the report was. It was a little vague. So hopefully all is well and he comes back soon. That said, this changes nothing. This is expected. I don't know. This was expected. This is going to happen. This was going to happen at some point in time this year, and probably multiple times. And this is why we had concern coming into the year of if you're touting him as a significant part of your offensive team, your offensive game plan, this specific part of your offensive, your wide receivers role playing, or the lineup. That's a problem because you can't rely on him week to week. You can't rely on him as of right now. At no point has he shown that he can consistently get on the field. I hope he can this year. I hope he comes back and does it. But at this point, we're entering into year 3. This goes back into his college career. You just can't sit here and say, I think that guy is going to play on this Sunday coming up. Doesn't matter what Sunday it is. You just can't have that confidence at this point in time.
Yeah, best ability is availability, right? I mean, that's
availability is ability.
Best availability is availability. That's Craig Stout. You can put my name on that. That's another shirt that we're going to do, guys. We're just making whole bunch of shirts here. And the hard part about all of this is when Brett Veach was asked about him this offseason, what's the thing that he said? When they were talking about the expectations for Kadarius Toney this year and everything that he's going to bring to the table. Yeah, his first thing was, well, goal number one, get through training camp, be healthy. And it's like, man, okay, now, first of all, the cleanup, that makes a lot more sense. That contact, that's not just a shot across the bow of this guy who's very rarely healthy saying, hey, he's got to get through camp healthy. He's looking at it from the standpoint of he had a cleanup. We want to make sure that he's there and in camp and healthy and all of that. The other part about this that really sucks, Kadarius Toney came in mid-season. Kadarius Toney got a playbook and was said, okay, here are the 9 things that you're going to do. I'm obviously oversimplifying. Everybody says he's a smart guy, picking up the playbook quickly. They certainly condensed it so that they get him on the field because he is an electric playmaker with the ball in his hands. We all agree with that. This training camp was supposed to build off of that. They've talked about that before. Like, build off of that. Learn the rest of the route tree. Learn the rest of the offense. Get integrated with some of the ways that you're going to be used as we expand your role. Now, all of a sudden, you're missing a bunch of reps there. Certainly, he's got mental reps. He's able to sit there, study the playbook, kind of expose himself to some of that. But being on the field with those other guys, seeing how they run the route, seeing how he needs to be there for Patrick Mahomes on this given route, he's missing that time. So, yes, it's going to be great when Kadarius Toney is on the field, but this is some of the elements of, hey, is he going to evolve as a wide receiver? Is he going to take that next step as a wide receiver? This sort of injury, this sort of thing, preventing him from being at camp at all. I mean, we don't know if he's going to be there or not, but if he misses all of it, it might look a lot like last year. And I think the Chiefs are definitely hoping that he could be more than that and carry a little bit more of the load than maybe he.
To be fair, like, he did get some work in this. Like, it does seem like he was around Mahomes this offseason and like they were able to get some stuff done there. And you said some of the mental reps, like there is going to be an escalation and a jump in his performance and in what they ask him to do this year. I genuinely do believe that, but it's so disconcerting and it's a bummer to see, a guy that's clearly electric with the ball in his hands, a guy who made some big plays last year. I don't know how many humans on the planet are going to be able to stand up on that grass that the Philadelphia Eagles keep crying about. Maybe their tears are why the field was wet. I don't know. That's something for another day. But like, just being able to stay up and make that play on the punt return. And, you saw some of the flashes and ability that he had last season. It did seem like they were trending towards being able to get him involved in a very big way. And it's not like to say that they won't be able to, but it's just another addition to the list of concerns that you have with his availability. And man, we were talking a little bit about this. I think, I hope maybe we can go. We have, like, good thing is we have receipts. We can go back and maybe listen to all of our episodes about Juju Smith-Schuster last year. But it felt like he was in a better place health-wise heading into last year than maybe like Kadarius Toney was, because we'd seen sample sizes of him producing at a high level. He hadn't had a lower body injury, I don't think, in a while. Coming to Kansas City, I think he dealt with a shoulder issue, I believe, his last year in Pittsburgh. But it felt like a little bit more optimism and belief that he could, maybe, be a more reliable target. The Chiefs don't have a guy with the track record of success on the field like a Juju Smith-Schuster this year. And it kind of feels like the Chiefs were operating with last year's plan B almost a little bit with this wide receiver group. And now they've lost Kadarius Toney. So now the burden and the onus goes on Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who, I mean, fantastic in the Bengals game and had a strong year. I don't know like how much growth and how much you're going to be able to change with him as a route runner and what he's asked to do. The burden's going to fall big time on Sky Moore and Rashee Rice now. And I X'd about this earlier. I tweeted about
don't do that. No.
I tweeted about this from Kemper Arena earlier today.
Did you thread it? Did you thread the needle?
I didn't. But last year we saw this defense get thrown to the fire with a lot of rookies. They might just need to throw Sky and Rashi into the fire.
Andy would never. Andy will never throw an unready guy in there. There is no version of Andy's offense where they can just play static cover 2 for the wide receivers to let these rookies just fight for their life.
This isn't what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they just might need to be a different kind of urgency and onus on this coaching staff to get those two ready quicker and push on these guys to achieve that a little bit faster than put more pressure to get that done is all I'm saying.
So okay. I think we should turn to like the Sky Moore and the Rashee Rice of the whole thing here. If all accounts, both have looked very good so far early in training camp, and that's exactly what you want to hear. Sky Moore specifically the coaches have talked about it, and then he's come up and talked about how much more comfortable he feels this year at this point in time compared to last year, even during the season, learning the playbook, understanding where Mahomes wants him to be, how Mahomes wants him to read this out, what his adjustments are for this and that. So I think if you want to look directly at one person that has to step up, that needs to be quote unquote thrown to the fire, it's Sky Moore, but I don't think it's thrown to the fire anymore. They're expecting him to now be ready. He's kind of expecting himself to be ready. And I think that's a fair thing for us as fans to expect. I think that is fair for us this year to think, okay, last year was the learning curve of a guy coming from Western Michigan after 3 seasons and played running back and quarterback in high school before that to learn one of the most complicated wide receiver playbooks in the entire NFL in 1 season. I think a slow drag along should have been more expected than we all gave real credit to. So this year, that's gone. Now he's been here. I think Sky Moore should have, I don't want to say massive, but he should have a little bit more expectations on him. We should expect a little bit more out of him. It's up to him to still go out there and do it, but it sounds like it is going the direction. Yes. I don't know. Blaine Gabbert's got them thighs out too right now. He's contending. But yeah, so Sky Moore is the guy that I think has to make the big step. I'm excited for what Rice has shown, but Sky Moore is the guy that is at this point where he has to step forward. They should push him out there. They should throw him out there and see if he can sink or swim, because they have to know now. He's had a year to get accustomed to the playbook. He's had a year to learn. He spent a lot of time this offseason working with Mahomes. It wasn't just for a week or two or a couple workouts. He spent a lot of time down there working with them, and I think that was very purposeful. A lot of what they're saying is very purposeful. He's going to get a chance to be that guy, and everything we've seen says that he's going to take a step forward. It's just how big of a step. Is he going to step into the Juju Smith-Schuster shoes, or is he going to step into the McCole Hardman shoes? And I don't mean like his exact role. I just mean the level of production, the type of player he is for the offense. Is he just a guy that is getting specific packages drawn up that has the occasional pop game, or is he going to be the consistent guy that shows up week in and week out and does what they need? He is that guy that has to do it this year. I think that's fair to want that from him and expect that from him, both from a fan and the team perspective.
Yeah, the Juju replacement role just kind of makes sense with his skill set. I know we've said that multiple times. I think that is a like enough for kind of replacement there. Sky's obviously not going to come out there and put up the same numbers as Juju. I don't place that expectation on him at all. But some of the ways that he can manipulate defenses, the ways that he can win, it makes a lot of sense to kind of put him into some of those similar roles. And he's said everything right so far and is doing everything right so far on the field. This is one of those that we talk about a lot. This is geared towards the receivers. Camp is just plain and simple, is geared towards the receivers. If you hear the defense is having a good day, if the DBs are having a good day, that's a big yikes for the receivers because it's very clearly slanted towards them. That being said, Sky Moore routinely making plays, routinely popping, routinely showing up, and then getting a day 2 podium with Travis Kelce, Steve Spagnuolo, with Trent McDuffie. Like, those are guys that when you look at the team, you think of guys that are going to play significant roles for their respective, sides of the ball. Steve Spagnuolo is obviously the defensive coordinator. That's a good group for Sky Moore to be in. That's the one that you want him to be in because he's stepping into that role. He's showing more confidence in his ability. He's showing an ability to perform on the field. And I do wonder if some of what we saw last year was completely sidelined by those early season special teams reps. I think, the fumbles, the stuff that happened when he was being a punt returner, I can certainly see that getting in his head. And I can certainly see the coaching staff maybe saying, hey, let's put an increased focus on you returning punts. They really, really tried to have him stay out there and be out there for a long time. It could have been that they reduced his role in the offense to get him up to speed, to build that confidence, because the last thing Andy wants to do is bring a rookie in, put him in a role, and then immediately remove him and tear him down. That is terrible for your confidence. That is terrible for your mental state playing fast on the field. He's going into this season without that expectation. He is going in with a very clear and defined role on this offense. And I can see how that alone might be enough to make him feel certainly more comfortable than he did last year.
I am quite excited to get eyes on Sky Moore and Rashee Rice sooner rather than later. Both utilization, where they're being asked to play, what they're doing, some positive indicators early on so far from both of them. You're seeing them win how they've won in the past when you've seen some of their high-level moments. And it does sound like there is some chemistry that has developed between Patrick Mahomes and Sky Moore already, too, for sure. Going to be a lot of fun to check these guys out.
Shout out Rashee Rice for bouncing back from a rough first day, too. I mean, we just haven't talked about him on anything since. Good for him to bounce back and have a couple good practices after throwing up that first day, right? It sounds like he's done a really good job, and we've all seen the catches.
Won the conditioning test.
Won the condition. Maybe that's why he threw up. Maybe he was challenging himself to win the conditioning catch and he threw up. Been there before. Would do it every time too if there was a potential competition.
Maddie, I can assure you I would never do that.
Shout
Scared
out
to compete.
Not a dog. He's a cat. Richie James, shout out Richie James, made some nice plays too. We're talking about wide receiver room. That is the one veteran they brought in. You want to also add somebody into the mix that could be eating into some of the vacated space from Juju Smith-Schuster. Richie James operates over the middle of the field relatively well, especially out of the slot. They got some options there, and the guys that they are hoping to step up, the Rices, the Sky Moores, the Richie James, early on without padded practices, have looked like they are kind of on their way to doing that.
We're going to be watching everything that happens here at training camp. We're going to be reacting to any of the news that comes out of there. We are beyond excited to be talking about football again and new storylines and all that good stuff. Hopefully we get some resolution on some of the things we got done talking about today. We'll be back on Thursday. Well, Craig and Maddie will be back on Thursday. I will
Hollywood.
not be. Yeah, I know. But I'll see you guys Monday. That's going to do it for the KC Laboratory.